Welcome to Fantastic Vision. Please subscribe us before you watch today's video. On November 10th, a Bloomberg report drew global attention. The EU not only planned to pressure member states, but also intended to cut off funding to non-member states through its Global Gateway program, halting funding for projects using Huawei equipment. In short, this is yet another deliberate attempt by the US and the West to suppress and contain Huawei's 5G technology. This domineering, those who obey me prosper, those who oppose me perish, approach reminds me of economist Liu Qiyuan's statement. Only by thoroughly hurting the West can we have a chance to solve the problem. The ink is barely dry on the Nexperia semiconductor incident, and the EU is already launching a new round of pressure on China. What is the logic behind this? As Western containment measures against China intensify, how should Chinese companies respond? This latest move by the EU against Huawei is a premeditated political pressure tactic. Hannover Kunin, the EU's executive vice president in charge of technology sovereignty and other matters, hopes to upgrade the 2020 recommendation to stop using high-risk vendors in mobile networks into a legally binding mandatory regulation. This means that EU member states, which previously had independent decision-making power, will also be forced to comply with the EU-US Security Council's guidelines, preventing Huawei and ZTE network equipment from entering the European network communications market. This strategy, emerging at a critical juncture with the Nexperia semiconductor case still unresolved, is essentially a new round of pressure on China. If the recommendation becomes a legally binding clause, member states that do not comply could face infringement lawsuits and economic penalties. This will significantly increase the barriers for Chinese telecommunications companies to enter the European operator market. Ironically, from the US's smear campaign against Huawei's 5G equipment, alleging unfounded cybersecurity risks, to the EU's plan to implement a ban on Huawei and ZTE network equipment, the West has yet to produce any substantial evidence. This presumption of guilt approach is, in effect, an abuse of the national security issue to provide a pretext for suppressing and containing Chinese companies. If Huawei's network equipment truly poses a risk, why hasn't the EU produced any evidence after so many years of investigation? Huawei has operated in Europe for so many years without any major security issues, so how come there's suddenly a security threat? Frankly, this is the EU finding excuses and reasons to curb the rapid development of Huawei and other Chinese companies in the network equipment sector. They worry that if they don't impose timely controls on Huawei and ZTE's network equipment, European telecommunications equipment companies will starve due to a lack of orders. If we're talking about equipment security, then American telecommunications service providers are actually less secure. The PRISM scandal was known globally, yet Europe dared not say a strong word against the US, or even demand that the US be held accountable. This blatant double standard essentially means that European politicians have chosen to side with the US over China, rather than making decisions based on Europe's own interests. In fact, some European countries are able to maintain objectivity and neutrality on related issues. For example, the Spanish Ministry of the Interior emphasized in a statement that the equipment procurement contract with Huawei poses no security risks and meets the security level required by the national security framework. Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska had previously stated that the country's security agencies have full control over the data on the servers, which cannot be accessed externally. Spain's tough stance is underpinned by a clear economic logic. As not the wealthiest EU member state, Spain needs to upgrade its communications infrastructure within a limited budget. Huawei's technology is undeniably more cost-effective than comparable Western products. Given the obvious lack of security risks, Spain's decision to use more cost-effective network equipment to build its network system, driven by national interests, is essentially protecting the interests of its own companies. From the Nexperia incident to the recent Huawei and ZTE network equipment incidents, it's clear that the US is pressuring the EU to build a technological iron curtain, excluding Chinese companies globally. Under this domineering approach, the EU is willingly acting as the anti-China vanguard, raising questions about Europe's independence and motives. Faced with unreasonable suppression from the West, China cannot merely passively defend itself. It must learn to take the initiative and make the other side feel real pain. The Nexperia incident is a prime example. Faced with the Dutch government's coercive intervention, China's Ministry of Commerce swiftly and forcefully implemented countermeasures, banning Nexperia's subsidiaries and subcontractors in China from exporting specific components and finished products. By controlling Nexperia's global delivery choke point, China has created a powerful bargaining chip. Before China could proactively resolve the issue, Europe had already begun pressuring the Netherlands. Faced with statements from major automotive manufacturing countries like Germany, the Dutch Minister of Economy was forced to express a desire to consult with China to seek the lifting of China's export controls. The rare earth card, played in this context, also has a significant impact on Europe's supply chain. Only by inflicting real pain on Europe can it be secured to maintain neutrality during this crucial period of Sino-US competition. Otherwise, without significant repercussions, Europe will likely continue to act as a henchman for the United States. Currently, Chinese companies are facing enormous external pressure. Under this pressure, the only way for China to achieve technological breakthroughs is to continuously accelerate independent innovation and supply chain integration. Huawei's 5G technology, Nexperia's power devices, and ZTE's communication equipment are all achievements forced out by Western pressure.